G'day Bundy Files. This is the third instalment in the ongoing saga of Ted's compartmentalizing behaviour, and it's for the book Ted Bundy, A Visual Timeline. Now today I'm going to add 3 items of information that support the assertion that Ted was indeed an extreme compartmentalizer. 2 of these come from written reports, and in reading them one gets a sense of the frustration of the writers of those reports that Ted is basically locking them out of his personality, that they felt those couldn't get inside his head at all. Now the first person I'm going to introduce is Dr. Van Osten. He was the psychiatrist who evaluated Ted while Ted was incarcerated in Utah State Prison after the Carol Deronge case. And it's dated 7th of June 1976. And in it, Van Osten writes in his last paragraph, his concluding paragraph, he writes, "It is my feeling that there is much more to his personality structure than either the psychologist or I have been able to determine. However, as long as he compartmentalizes, rationalizes, and debates every facet of his life, I do not feel that I adequately know him, and until I do, I cannot predict his future behavior." So clearly he's putting forward the compartmentalizing concept here, but he's also adding rationalizing and debating. And this is interesting because normally you'd associate a person who's logically coherent in their arguments, who rationalizes and debates well, as a quite intelligent person. And indeed, in a lot of cases, Ted came across like this, but that's not what Van Osten's getting on about. He was getting on about Ted's emotional intelligence. And so when he was asking Ted questions of a more emotional nature, he wasn't expecting Ted to answer with his head, he was expecting Ted to answer with his gut. But that's not what he got. What he got was a whole lot of, rationalizing and debating kind of responses. And so he concluded that Ted was compartmentalizing and that he was getting locked out of Ted's character. He just couldn't get inside his head. The psychologist that Van Osten was referring to here was Al Carlisle. I've also got his reports, but don't feel that he really locked onto the compartmentalizing concept as clearly as Van Osten, so I've just omitted that. Now, the second report is from January 17th, 1978, and it's from Mike Fisher. He was the Colorado investigator who was on to the Karen Campbell case. And he was chasing Ted up all the way through from 1975 onwards. But this report was to a guy called Steve Williams, who was from the Florida Department of Criminal Law Enforcement. And it's obviously January 17th, so it's just after the Kiamiga murders. And so this is when a lot of people were trying to provide information to the Florida investigators, and this is one of the letters that came through. So in it, Fisher writes quite succinctly in a sentence, "Bundy is an evasive individual who exercises compartmentalized thinking." So this is quite to the point, and comes from Fisher's early experience with Ted in Utah when he was interviewing Ted about the Karen Campbell case. And pretty much every time Mike Fisher had Ted kind of checkmated into a corner, Ted wiggled his way out with all kinds of rationalizations and evasive maneuvers, and really often, even when it got to the emotional level, Ted was just avoiding it, and it really comes across as someone who's got something to hide. And I think Fisher picked up on this, and now in his official kind of reporting style, he concluded that it's a kind of a compartmentalizing behavior. Ted's locking away one part of his character away from the light so that no one can see it, and just presenting another face, which often gets itself into all kinds of trouble in the way it argues, because it's just so disconnected emotionally from things. And even a detective was able to pick up on this. So I find that quite interesting. Now the third piece of evidence I'm going to introduce is actually an excerpt from the James Dobson interview on the eve of Ted's execution. And it's a small excerpt, and this time it's from Ted's point of view. This is Ted describing his compartmentalizing behavior himself. So I'll let you watch this small excerpt now, and when it's finished, I'll come back and we'll have a bit of a discussion about it.
You had this compartmentalized...
This compartmentalized, very well-focused, very sharply focused area where it was like a black hole. It was like a, like a crack, and everything that fell into that crack just disappeared. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Right, so having just watched this, I'm thinking about James Dobson's response, like, does he understand? He sounds really vague there. Like he doesn't actually really grasp what Ted's getting at. And but I can clearly understand what Ted's talking about here. His use of language is very, very graphic. His use of the word crack and black hole it says so much. If you think about the way he went about his murders, often he threw his victims down gullies, down ravines, into riverbeds and things like that, down cracks essentially in the earth. This is a way of him getting the heinous act that he committed out of his mind, and basically putting it in the black hole. And if you think about just something in your life, if you want to get rid of something, often there's something that might be in your house or in your life that you want to get rid of, and you just don't like it, you don't want to see it, you can just pick it up, throw it in the rubbish bin and get it taken out in the rubbish, and once it's gone in the rubbish, it's gone forever, kind of thing. It's like into a black hole, and it kind of, you feel like, well, it's gone now, it's out of my mind, it's out of my life. And in a lot of ways, Ted operated in this kind of way. So psychologically, the terms crack and black hole are very, very revealing in terms of his way of getting rid of the guilt and the thoughts that were associated with his murders. So I think I'll leave it there at this point. So I'll wrap up the conversation about compartmentalizing in the next installment just briefly, and then I think I want to move on to a new topic, and then probably later on I'll come back to this topic when I start talking about the brain, the neuroscience actually behind compartmentalizing behavior itself. So I'll leave it there with you guys. Hopefully this will generate some thoughts and maybe some comments, and if you have any questions, get back to me. Otherwise, I'll see you in my next installment. Cheers.